Now, when you're shopping for ammunition out there and you see some types of ammo labeled as toxic and some labeled as non-toxic, is that actually really the best nomenclature to be using out there? Well, Nephi Cole from the National Shooting Sports Foundation joined us on this podcast to talk about a recent hot-button topic and a lot of the facts and figures behind these types of ammunition and why it may be a little bit more complicated than that and requires some more research on our parts as shooters and hunters into the ramifications and effects these cartridges have. So, as usual, we want to know your thoughts in the comments below on this topic, and thanks for listening, everybody.
What is going on, everybody? Jimmy to my right. We have Ruben across the table from us, frequent guest, and joining us via the modern marvel of electricity and other things I don't understand, Nephi Cole from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Now, the catalyst for this podcast was I was recently, maybe not asked to, I was given the opportunity, we all were, to voice our opinions on a survey, which actually, you know what? Thank you, DNR, for extending the opportunity for us to voice our opinions. But there was a series of questions on there. There was a lot of questions. The entire survey took me almost an hour. There's definitely
too. It did, yeah. It's a long survey.
And they do a good job. They provide kind of some background and a little bit of framing for each of their questions. Essentially revolving around, I'd say oftentimes potential modifications to game and fish regulations. That's going to be somewhat accurate. But a section of those.
Did you vote for the experimental badger season?
Yeah.
Same. I would love to do that anyway.
And spring bear.
And spring bear, and broadening some of our underwater spearing regulations as well, because I have intentions of doing that in this state.
It's also a great time.
Heck yeah.
So super stoked on that.
But literally the first questions, sorry to bring you off topic.
So the first questions revolved around various instances where you, I guess, should or shouldn't be able to use non-toxic shot. Or, excuse me.
Or you should be required potentially to use, quote, non-toxic.
Yes, Jim, you said that much better. So I'll give you the first question. Do you support requiring the use of non-toxic shot on all state-owned or managed properties except for department-designated shooting ranges, right? So all these questions, and maybe we'll go through all of them. But I guess kind of this series of questions was kind of the catalyst for this podcast today with Nephi. We'll have him introduce himself here in a minute. But, it kind of raised some questions for me. Like, number one, I probably need to educate myself better on this topic, right? Mm-hmm. And, do the research, look at the research that has been done, formulate, kind of, I guess, an educated, opinion on this topic. And then also, is calling, lead or non-lead options, is the use of the terminology non-toxic, is that an accurate way to talk about it? And even in these questions, and again, like, this has been an education process for me, but is that even almost a leading way?
Yeah.
Are you kind of leading somebody who may not be educated or not educated, but like super informed about everything that revolves around this topic?
I hear you.
I guess for me personally, right, if I had zero knowledge, and maybe I'll even use like a different example, but if somebody said, well, Mark, you can drink this non-toxic glass of water or this toxic glass of water, I know which one I'm going to pick. And maybe and this is a super extreme example, and maybe it doesn't exactly have parallels. It probably doesn't, but anyway, that's my thinking.
I know what you mean, because when I first read the questions, I remember seeing, do you support requiring the use of non-toxic ammo in XYZ? And then a couple questions change out the XYZ at the end. And like you said, if you're not super up to snuff, you don't know exactly how all that stuff breaks down. You'd see it and you think, well, why wouldn't I? Toxic, non-toxic. I mean, it just makes sense. So Nephi, this is where you come in because you
seems
sent
pretty
us
cut and dry when you say it like that, doesn't it? Like somebody's like, oh yeah, toxic versus non-toxic. Would you rather be in a toxic conversation or a non-toxic conversation?
Yeah,
like,
anything toxic versus non. I'd rather take the non-toxic.
Jim, you know I hate conflict.
You do.
Yes, you don't want to be in any toxic conversations.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And then the question has to be then, okay, well, what's that threshold? How do you define that? And I think that's that's part of the reason that, people get confused about this issue is because, when you phrase it like that, it's a pretty scary thing. And the reality is if you then change it and say, well, what we're actually talking about is lead shot or non-lead shot or a traditional, copper core bullet versus all copper bullet, things like that kind of time, it changes the conversation, but it also requires that you have additional information and it requires education that is tough to do because it's a complex issue.
Yeah. I mean, the more I dove into it, the more I discovered that, it is a complex issue, and you can look at, different studies, that maybe skew one way or the other. And I think that's, where it comes down to, definitely probably reading as much as you can or talking with folks like you and getting as much information as possible to kind of make that, informed decision or formulate, at least what to you is like, a right opinion, surrounding the topic.
So the idea of, quote, toxic ammunition, and I guess that's kind of the funny thing too, because when you call ammunition that isn't or doesn't have lead in it, and I'm pretty sure the main thing we're talking about is lead versus stuff that doesn't have lead in it, right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely right.
There's not
so
other things.
Yep, we call it. We prefer in the industry. We say traditional ammunition.
So that's what I was going to ask. Yeah, because if you say the other kind is non-toxic, that the only leftover name for the other kind is toxic.
Right.
Yeah. And there's so much that you can unpack on this, but, to give you a little bit of background, people have been using the first monolithic bullets. This might blow your mind. The first monolithic bullets that people used effectively were actually made of lead, right? Mm-hmm. It's made of one substance, monolithic. And, but lead's been the go-to material for bullets for, I don't know, man, ever since it's well over 500 years. It's well over half a century. And I haven't got my notes in front of me from when I've talked about this before, but it's a long, long time. And the reason is lead's very efficient in bullets. It's heavy. It has a really high specific density, right? Which means when you compare it to the density of water, lead is very heavy for its size. And so that means that when you put a propellant behind it, like gunpowder, you can drive it through a barrel. You can drive it at speed, and it's going to maintain its energy longer. And then when it hits something, it's going to dissipate that energy. It's going to dissipate more energy because, law of conservation of energy comes into play. Physics come into play. The other thing that's nice about lead and why it's been popular for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years is because it's softer than steel. And so, as we all know, when we make guns out of, we make them out of steel. Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to decide what you're going to push with a high explosive down the barrel of a gun, it helps to find something. You have to have something that's softer than than the implement, that's softer than the gun, or else you destroy the gun. And so lead, of course, is soft enough that that it works in, all kinds of steel. It's going to be malleable enough that it can be slightly larger, right? And this is why, the bullets are, when you get a 22 bullet, what do they say, 223? And when you actually go buy it in the store and you mic it, it may be a little bigger. It's because that bullet, in order to get good pressure behind it, it's going to squish a little bit when it hits those riflings. That's why you get the deformation on the bullet. And then that's going to allow you to keep the pressure behind the bullet and then drive the bullet out. So there is a certain give and take when you're identifying materials that you can use for a bullet. And it just so happens that lead meets most of the criteria that you want for a substance that you can, that makes a great bullet. And that's why it's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's why it's going to continue to be used, because it's effective.
Now, are most, so when we're talking about a lot of this is revolved around hunting, but is it also are these questions also getting at then recreational shooters too? So because I know when you look at the types of ammunition out there, I mean, there's just saying I shoot 6.5 Creedmoor, I shoot 308 isn't necessarily even enough, because there's different kinds of 6.5 Creedmoor, there's different kinds of 308 that you would use. Yeah. One would be a terrible choice or just not a very good choice if you were out hunting. One wouldn't be the best choice if you were trying to do precision rifle. Is there one specific kind that's more in question here that tends to have more lead than others? Are there kinds that don't have any lead in them?
Well, I think
so. If you go across, I mean, it's an interesting question, and so I'll give it. I failed to give background, so let me tell everybody a little bit about myself and what I do. So I'm the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We are the Firearms Trade Association of America. So anybody that makes, moves, or sells a firearm, a component, and many accessories attached to firearms, that's our membership. So for example, Vortex is a member of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, as is Winchester, as is Cabela's and Shields and all these other places. So basically anybody that makes, moves, or sells a firearm or a related component, those are the people that that's our membership. It's about 12,000 members. We own a show called SHOT Show that a lot of people are aware of. And so that show, most people have never heard of us, but they've heard of the SHOT Show. And so we're involved with all the manufacturers, and we try and provide the best science. We're affiliated with SAMI. So if we hear SAMI specs on ammunition, they're in our basement. And so that's a group that we work with very, regularly to make sure that all of our manufacturers are producing arms and ammunition that meet SAMI specifications. And so those SAMI specifications, that's what keeps ammunition safe. It's what makes it effective. It's what makes sure that when you buy a 6.5 Creedmoor off of the shelf, as long as you, don't do custom reaming, or that when you buy a bullet that says 6.5 Creedmoor and you put it in your 6.5 rifle and you pull the trigger, that the gun doesn't explode. It's because everything falls under those specifications those SAMI specifications. And I tell you all that because that plays into this bullet selection, this bullet choice. So there are a variety of different types of bullets out there, but I'm gonna pigeonhole them into two kinds that we'll talk about. And then I think a lot of these questions were about shotgun ammunition. That needs to come into play too. Mm-hmm. So first, rifle bullets. We're going to classify them in two types. We're going to classify them into monolithic bullets, and we're going to classify them in traditional cup and core bullets. So cup and core bullet is the number one, well over 90% of the market. I mean, it's by a large margin. Cup and core is what you buy when you go to the store. So a cup and core bullet is made by taking an alloy, typically a copper bronze alloy, and giving it some shape of your bullet. And then you fill the interior of it with lead. And of course, it's easy to do that, right? Because you can melt lead pretty easily, and it's very malleable, and you can fill the inside of your bullet with it. And so your bullets may be full metal jacket. They may be ballistic tip. They may be, hollow point match, all these different things, but they're all basically the same thing. They're a jacket around a lead core. And then with sometimes there's something on the end that helps initiate expansion, right? Whether it's a design, whether it's lead hanging out the end, like a Sierra Game King, you got a little bit of lead on the end that helps initiate expansion, or whether it's a Hornady ELD-X that has the little tip that that's the heat shield tip that initiates expansion. So all those things do is they try and make it so that when the projectile hits something, if you need to have an expanding projectile, right? And that's not all cup and core bullets, but most hunting projectiles they're all expanding projectiles. It aids in expansion. Cup and core bullets, let's put those on the left-hand side. On the opposite side, we've got monolithics. So monolithic bullets just means that they're made out of one material. And so that one material, it could be it's typically also an alloy. So it's typically copper and something else. And the something else that's involved in there is what gives that bullet different properties in terms of how malleable it is, in terms of what, how hard it is, how it reacts and things like that. So those monolithic bullets, originally when you're buying a monolithic, it was straight up, it's just a hard piece of metal. And there are monolithic lead bullets too. If you ever use a hard cast bullet for bears or something like that in a handgun, monolithic lead. It's just hard cast. It's got something in to make the lead harder so it doesn't deform.
It'd be like a high
you also have
antimony
copper
bullet.
What's that?
It would be like a high antimony lead or a high antimony lead. Yeah.
Yes. So over the last 20 years, you've seen a huge resurgence in monolithic bullets. I say resurgence because initially bullets were all monolithic. So initially for the first, for hundreds and hundreds of years, they were monolithic, primarily lead. And then you had a guy, interestingly enough, by the name of Green, I think was the first one who started using, putting other components in the bullet to make it, and this was the 1800s, to make it perform differently. And then around about the time you had, then you started to see advances in technology where people figured out that that they needed to have a jacketed bullet. And it's about the time actually that you had Mausers, about bolt action guns and things like that, high pressure cartridges, smokeless powder. People started to kind of look into this jacketed bullet technology. And the jacketed bullet technologies where you have now the cup and core bullets that came in, and they dominated the early part of the 20th century, clear up until, the late, in the 1970s, 80s. I mean, primarily that was your bullets, were going to be these traditional bullets. So whether you were shooting and I say traditional, cup and core. So whether you were shooting a nozzle partition or whether you were shooting a Sierra Game King or, something like that, all these bullets are these traditional cup and core bullets. And, so whether you're shooting a Weatherby Mag or Winchester or target shooting or whatever, you're using the cup and core bullet. Well, monolithics made a comeback. People started using copper solids, brass solids, and I don't know that they ever fell out of favor with some dangerous game hunting in Africa. But different materials and the way that a monolithic bullet works, some people figured out that, hey, if you want a bullet that's really tough, that doesn't expand, that doesn't come apart, these monolithic bullets work really well. Enter new changes in monolithic bullets and some great technologies by companies like Barnes that started to make really good monolithic bullets and incorporate new technologies into monolithic bullets. So they took those into the next, up a level.
Yeah,
they took them up a level.
Like the TAC TX and then the Hornady GMX are two really phenomenal bullets.
Yep, the Barnes LRX, and they've done a lot. If you look at the design of those, what they've done is, you have a void in the middle of those, and then they design those bullets to open better than a traditional monolithic. So you could get some expansion out of a monolithic bullet. And so they really caught on. And there are some pluses to using monolithics. And then there are some, there's some trade-offs when you trade off between these two. And so to explain that briefly, some of the things that lead does well, monolithics don't do really well. And so it's important that you understand what bullet, you want to use for what purpose. If you want a bullet that expands, devastating expansion, monolithic might not be the right choice for you. And here's why. When you design a monolithic bullets typically, they work best when driven at higher velocities and when you are planning on breaking an animal down. And the reason I say that is because the way that they're designed, if you look at, what somebody's going to say, it's like, hey, almost 100% weight retention on a bullet, right? You shoot a big animal with a monolithic bullet, the sales pitch for that bullet, what people are going to want to see is when that bullet comes out the other side of that animal, bullet's intact. And if that's the way you're planning to hunt, it's a fantastic choice. If you're hunting dangerous game, fantastic choice. Large game, fantastic choice. There's a lot of reasons that monolithic bullets are very, very good for different uses. What you're not going to get with a monolithic bullet is if you were shooting let's use a burger. If you're using a burger bullet, like a hybrid hunter, or again a certain Sierra Game King or something like that, you're going to get a bullet that by design, that bullet is meant to expand violently, right? You're probably not ever going to you're not going to get a 90% weight retention in a burger hybrid because the bullet is not designed to do that. The bullet is designed to enter the vital areas of the animal and to be, to deposit all of its energy right there. And that's how those bullets are designed. That's a different design principle than the monolithic. And so both function, both are phenomenal bullets. Both have areas where they work better and don't work as well. Some of the advantages of traditional bullets, like, for example, a Burger again, to really get a monolithic to perform, it pays to know the performance envelope. You mentioned 6.5 Creedmoor. So I'd ask, with your 6.5 Creedmoor, how well do you know your ballistics?
Moderately okay-ish.
Yeah.
How long are you going to... For a monolithic bullet to really perform well, you don't want it to drop below 2,200 feet per second.
Right.
In that caliber. How many yards do you have?
Well, heck, it's probably only starting out at about, what, 24 to 28?
20, yeah, probably around 26, 25, I think, for me.
So what happens is, and this is the challenge, if you're you have to know your bullet and you have to know your limitations. So with a monolithic bullet, to really get it to perform the way you want, you got to know the performance window, the performance envelope, where that bullet's going to open effectively, where it's going to open the best. And Barnes has done a great job of addressing some of these issues with things like the triple shock and the tips triple shock, and other bullets where they've added design components to help them open at a lower speed. Having said that, when you look at a bullet like a Burger Hybrid, and you look at the performance window of that bullet, where it will open clear down into the
1,500-1,600 sometimes even.
Absolutely. That's where you get it's just a different design parameter. And so for some guns, if you walk out of the house with a firearm and you know that your maximum velocity is 2,500 feet per second, and you know when you're going to drop below the threshold where, a monolithic is going to open right for you, well, then you need to make sure when you're hunting game that you never violate that, right? Because you have a responsibility, if you're going to be shooting game, to shoot game within the windows that your cartridge is really going to perform right for you.
Right.
And so, and it can be different on the other side as well. There's, I think we all have a close personal friend who hunts with a 6.5 300 Weatherby. That cartridge has got some serious velocity. So if you're using a copper projectile on top of that cartridge, you're really getting, it's really going to perform the way it was designed to, because the other advantage of a monolithic is they'll tolerate speed, right? They will tolerate being pushed extremely fast.
Because they don't have those little thin jackets to potentially fling apart.
Well, and they tolerate it. They tolerate too. If I'm correctly, they tolerate impacting game at higher velocity too, because the bullet's not going to blow apart.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So there's some. So I've heard. The guy I call my ballistic sensei said that, for your traditional bullet, your sweet spot in velocity, your muzzle velocity, anything above about 3,200 feet per second, you start to really dance on the line of, with terminal performance of where you might be pushing it too fast. And again, that's because, physics are what physics are. Once you drive a certain, there's only, you can't escape physics. With a traditional bullet, you've got to be careful that you're not trying too hard with that traditional bullet, because it's malleable. It's designed it's designed differently. Whereas, once again, if you're driving a bullet at 3,500 feet per second from a 6.5 300 Weatherby, that's lightning in a bottle. You got a lot going on for you. Now, the trade-off for that is this: if I'm buying my wife a rifle, right, and I'm going to have to buy her a 6.5 Creedmoor or a 6.5 300 Weatherby, which direction am I likely to go? Or maybe the 6.5, the new Weatherby 6.5.
How much do you like your wife?
RPM.
That's really the question to ask.
A lot of the modern cartridges, and this is what I tell people when we're talking about this issue, is that a lot of the modern cartridges, one of the challenges that you face, let's just say if everybody were to shoot a monolithic bullet, one of the challenges that you face is the design. And this is really wonky, but a 6.5 Creedmoor, that cartridge, the way that it's designed for these long, skinny bullets, you can drive those at a lower velocity. And because of the magic that we have in technology now, I can get a 6.5 Creedmoor. I can get a really nice Vortex optic for a very reasonable cost. And suddenly, I don't have to drive a bullet at a bajillion miles an hour anymore to be accurate. I can use my rangefinder. I can hit that animal at 300 yards with that rangefinder. I can reach up onto my turret. I can dial 4 minutes of angle, 5 minutes of angle, whatever it is, onto the turret of that optic. And suddenly the disadvantage that I would have been at, 20 years ago for not shooting a Magnum just went away. And my 6.5 Creedmoor at 400 yards with a good optic, I'm now able to deliver better accuracy and equal knockdown power than I would have been able to 20 years ago using a variety of Magnums. And that's just because now the ballistic coefficients are better on the bullets we use. And it's the revolution in optics that has allowed that to happen. And that's what's really unique from a company like Vortex. Really, companies like Vortex that have popularized and made available high-end optics at reasonable prices has allowed the everyman out there in the hunting community to do more with a more accurate, smaller cartridge than you would have ever been able to do before. Mm-hmm. Now, when I tell people to buy a gun, I tell everybody, I really tell a lot of people to buy 6.5 Creedmoors, new hunters. It's just a fantastic cartridge if you know your limitations and you're working under your limitations and making the right choices in optics and making the right choices in bullets.
Yeah, so, and you can't get.
I just talked for a long time.
You can't even get 308 ammo anymore. They don't even make it. So
antiquated,
right? Yeah, unless you. That's part of the muzzleloader season now.
Yep.
Anyway,
but I think guys use that when they dress up in period correct clothing and they get their 308s.
Yeah, it's a handicap.
But well, this kind of actually is making a bit more sense of when we were in the 6.5 Revolution podcast. Ryan Muckern was talking at the end how important it is to have bullet selection, proper bullet selection for what you're going to be doing, and understanding, if you're going to be shooting something really close up, that bullet's going to be impacting the game with higher velocity than it would if it were really far away. And so that's where, maybe the Monolithic would come into play, or if you're shooting stuff that's going to be a little bit further out where you may have dropped a little velocity at that point, that's where the sort of cup and core stuff would come into play. And it really sounds like Nephi and other guys too. I mean, feel free to weigh in with your opinions as well, but it sounds like both styles have their place. It's not necessarily that, the argument is, we should get rid of one and keep the other. Both styles have their place. But I think that some of the confusion, or I guess sort of a buzz, has been around the fact that one is labeled as toxic and therefore bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then one is labeled as sort of non-tox, and therefore, why wouldn't you want to use that? And when in reality, that's kind of the difficulty that we're in.
It's kind of silly too. It's kind of silly because it seems like this was never a conversation about rifle ammo until now. Suddenly, you're seeing questions that are like,
yes,
should all ammunition fired on a public property be non-toxic? And it's like, wait, I thought this was about waterfowl hunting with non-lead shot, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what it was always about. And now it's all of a sudden this thing where it's like, well, why don't we do all this? It's like, wait, let's take a step back.
And Nephi as well, can you, and I hope we get to this point as well, because we're talking about, obviously anytime, we've already said this, anytime somebody hears toxic versus non-toxic, it's almost like saying good versus bad. I'll pick the non-toxic, whatever. But the toxic aspect of it, or what people are most concerned about, and I remember at first, I thought it seemed natural in my head, okay, I guess if we're spraying lead all over the place and I guess it's toxic, I don't know, it gets into like our water supplies or something, or it gets, but then people started bringing up concerns of, your avian predators or whatever, your raptors will come in and
you bet
they'll pick it up, or when you shoot wild game and then you go in and you harvest the meat and you eat it, could it get into your system? And so that's where some people started having concerns.
So during the 1980s, 70s, 80s, it's interesting you mentioned putting lead sinkers in your gas tank. Don't do that anymore.
Bluey told me to.
Not again. Don't do it. So during that era, lead. So lead is, as like any element, there are different variations of it. There are different pHs, and it does different things at different, at different pH and at different state. And the lead that's in your gas tank, which was in a liquid form, is much different than the lead that was, than hard antimony lead and things like that. It's more what we call bioavailable. So it can be picked up by animals more easily. It can be picked up by other things out there more easily. So
Nephi, you're talking about back in the day when we had leaded gasoline, right?
Leaded gas, leaded paint was very common. There were a lot of sources of lead in the environment. And this is not that long ago. Yeah. Right. And so,
and I think that's important to bring up. And that's one thing that I did want to mention. Like, I don't think anybody at this table is trying to dispute that lead can be a toxic substance. Like that's why we don't have leaded gas anymore. That's why we don't have leaded paint anymore. That's why my mom probably, when I was growing up fishing, she'd say, "Don't bite those split shot sinkers, Mark." And I'd say,
"But you did it anyway."
I still do it.
I did it anyway. and maybe we're seeing the repercussions of that today, Jim. But
that's why
I think you still look pretty good.
I appreciate it. But I don't think anybody's like we're trying to argue against. That it can be, right? Because, I think that's a known fact. I think we can accept that as fact. Ruben brought up, the waterfowling, and kind of the changes in those regulations, which I think started in 1991 as far as like kind of like a across the board
full
change.
Implementation.
But let's anyway, I just kind of wanted to go back in time that we weren't talking about current times.
So there are some great studies out there showing the negative effects of lead on wildlife populations when you go back to that era. And so when you go back to that era, when you had those other things in the environment, and the traditional waterfowl load was what? It was a lead load, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's the same thing. Lead has a high specific density, which means you can deliver a lot of energy at further distance than you can with something else, with less punishment to your shoulder and your gun. And so,
like on that point too, like as far as shotgun shells go, lead is going to deform more as it impacts a target, therefore dumping more energy in that target. It's not always just passing straight through like a steel shot would do.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And you'll see some people with older firearms. If you have a shotgun your grandfather gave you need to take a good hard look at whether or not you should be shooting steel through that shotgun, because it could destroy the gun.
Yep.
And so all those things said, we passed regulation was passed by the, internationally. We worked together to make sure that our migratory waterfowl, that we were not using lead to hunt migratory waterfowl. And about that same time, other implementation took place. That's why you don't get leaded gasoline anymore. That's why you're not going to buy paint with lead in it. There's a large scale effort made to take all these different potential sources of lead out of the environment. And no one can argue that wildlife benefited from that. And so you'll see studies pre-1994 where you can definitely see population level effects of lead, where you could test for lead in different animal populations, specifically waterfowl, and you had negative effects. You had die-outs. You had things that were occurring. After 1994, you can't find those studies anymore. Why? Because the effects don't exist. So that's where this gets to be really tricky. Because if you start looking post-1994, and you pull up studies now that are related to lead effects on wildlife, and I'm going to separate these into two kinds of effects: individual effects and individual toxicity. Let's remember that. And population level impacts. They're different. So population level impact, what we're saying is we can take 100 animals and we can sample the blood of all of them, or we can these many animals die and we can look at it and we can see that we've definitely got something that is affecting the trajectory of the population, right? After 1994, there are no studies, zero, that show that as being a population level impact, that there are any population level impacts associated with the use of lead and ammunition. Now, I do want to say that doesn't mean you're not going to find individual effects. And there's one big giant caveat that I have to say here. That doesn't include California condors.
Yep.
And so this is why it doesn't include California condors. You have like 100 birds. You had less than that in California. They're an endangered species that eat almost exclusively what?
Carrion.
Carcasses.
Carrion. Giant. Yes, that's it. Basically, that is their diet. And if you only have 50 individuals of any type left in the entire world, and Joe dies of lead toxicity, that's a population level impact. You can't avoid that. And so California made the decision, and initially they were trying to do it voluntarily. The politics of that state aren't such that they favor voluntary action. But what happened is California ended up, there was rightfully banning the use of lead in the Condor area, in areas where condors were going to ingest it. And so our organization would never argue that that was a bad idea. What we would argue is that there is anything to say that same effect occurs, in other places, and that it's not unique to condors. And let me tell you why. And this is kind of gets into why people argue about lead now. Raptors. So there aren't, nobody's going to be able to argue or show you data that's going to say there are population level negative effects of using lead ammunition on a population of animals. They're not going to find the data. Now, what they are going to be able to say is, we found lead toxicity in a certain animal died, and we tested it and we found lead. Or we find a bald eagle someplace and it has lead toxicosis and it's sick. That's a reality. That's not something that we would argue. It's not something that I'm trying to do this respectfully, but if you go to a hospital and you walk in and you find a guy that's got diabetes in the hospital, and it's because he, eats a bunch of, Twinkies and Ho-Hos, I'm not going to tell you that eating Twinkies and Ho-Hos doesn't give you diabetes. There are these causes that are irrefutable. What is refutable is that a population level impact? Are all raptors, or is this the problem is we take one raptor that has an issue, and then we apply what we have found, and we like, well, we need to save raptors, and we found Joe the raptor who had lead in his blood, and so therefore all raptors, in order to save raptors, we have to take lead, get rid of lead ammunition. It's just the ends doesn't justify the means, and then the steps along the way for justifying that action, they don't exist. And I'll give you an example. I think you guys are aware, there are a number of studies out there, and there's a study out of Canada that I like. It's a really good one, where they looked at the what kills raptors, what is killing raptors, in North America. And if you took that number and you looked at what is killing raptors in North America, about 50% of the deaths are anthropogenic strikes. And this is human-caused raptor deaths. So first of all, we have to take away the number one issue, which is habitat loss, right?
Okay.
But then let's just get down to the other one. And let's get to, then we're at 50%, we're going to have raptors hit something, a building, a fence line, a windmill, a car. Let's go down the list, and we're going to get West Nile. We're going to get, house cats, like everything else. When we get down to the bottom of what's killing raptors, about 3% is toxicity, something poison. They ingested something poison. That's something, lead is going to be one of those things that they could have ingested, in addition to anything else in our environment that they could have ingested from the garbage dump or from the oil or whatever. There are going to be a lot of different things that are going to fall in that category. So yes, lead can kill birds, but it doesn't kill them in a proportionately higher rate than many other things that mankind does kill birds. And I think that that's where the concern comes in, is when you say toxic and non-toxic, and we've, this thought that lead is somehow really killing a ton of birds. It's just not the case. And so when you look at, and again, that doesn't mean we shouldn't care, but that does mean that we need to keep in mind, what are the things that, if we're going to spend a whole lot of energy on trying to improve, trying to keep raptors around, which we should be, and trying to keep birds around, where should we be spending our money and effort? And, there are some that would argue that this is not that thing, that this is kind of a red herring that people hear and that makes some people feel good, but it's really not. Literally, it is, a change in ammunition type. You will not be able to measure a change in wildlife populations.
Like if you started talking about maybe like toxic versus non-toxic windshields, then maybe people would start getting rid of cars on the road, or like tox versus non-tox windmills.
Yeah,
I have a really bad windmill phobia, so I'm fine getting rid of the windmills.
Yeah,
take them
for sure.
Take them down.
I saw one explode
Yeah,
once, got hit by lightning.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. I talked to some hunters, and I will tell you, this is this is factual. You can look, you can find this if you look at it. There's no doubt you're exponentially more likely to hit a bird and kill it on your way out to hunt with your car by like 100 times more likely than you are to ever have a potential impact because of the type of bullet that you shot. And I think it's really important to also point this out. When people were calling for this change, and this is the muddy where the waters start to get really muddy with something like the survey in Wisconsin. Lead shot. Some people say lead shot, and then they'll try and equate that over to lead bullets. And the challenge is this: if you're an elk hunter or a deer hunter, you got one bullet that you're probably hoping to get to deposit that one bullet in an animal this year, and you may or may not get that opportunity. That's a totally different world than waterfowling, where you had, you guys know the difference. You know how much you shoot in one scenario versus how much you shoot in another.
Yeah, especially if you're shooting with Mark.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and people have kind of painted it with a broad
case of shells a
brush.
day.
Yeah, people have really kind of painted this with the broad brush as if all things are created equal, and they're not. And I think our community, the sporting community, is actually, I think a voluntary approach that says, depending on where you're at and what you're hunting and how you hunt, you should choose the right bullet for you, is absolutely the right thing to do. And that is where we should be as a community. And that is what sportsmen should be doing. The problem is, like, it's not something that you should regulate, especially when you probably don't understand the issue. And this is an issue where most of the people that would say, like, oh yeah, we should all switch to non-toxic, they probably don't understand all the numbers, behind the scenes. And the numbers are deep, but they ought to give sportsmen confidence that, like, if you're using lead ammunition, you're not the scourge of wildlife. You're not having a negative effect. And and certainly, and the other issue is this, and maybe you guys are going to talk about this. There's a human health issue that people worry about.
I was going to hope we were going to get into that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about first, I'll just tell you there isn't one, and then we can go from there.
Marco, what was that thing you were saying earlier? You said you said there was some study out there where it said hunters that were tested for lead, content versus non-hunters or whatever, they had a slightly higher, or if you looked at it in a bubble, you would say, oh my gosh, they have like double the amount of lead as like a regular person who doesn't hunt. But then if you actually looked at it in terms of like what's actually dangerous, they were still far from the threshold.
Yeah. The way I understood that, it was that, exactly how you put it.
And I can tell you too. We have the indoor range here, right? So
yeah,
what do you see when you go down to the indoor range? All the de-lead wipes, right? That you wipe your hands off after you're done shooting. It should come as no surprise to anyone. If you're a hunter and you shoot and you practice and you clean your gun, guess what? You didn't get the lead in your system from eating the stuff you shot. You got it in your system from cleaning your guns and from shooting them and breathing in the.
I was thinking the same thing because
ionized lead that basically
so that's what
happens under the gun exploding.
Exactly, it's not very fair to say that it all came from the meat because. For that exact reason.
No, I've had my lead levels tested. Look at a guy like Josh Freilich who does competitive shooting, getting ready for the World Shotgun Shoot. He went to the doctor and they were like, "Yeah, you have too much lead in your system. If it stays this way for years, you'll probably have some issues." But it was for a couple months, and he practiced some safer practices like. Always washing his hands after he was done. Yeah. And to put that into context, he shot around 90,000 rounds of shotgun, which is a lot of pallets of shotgun.
It's like a week of duck hunting.
In a few short months. Yeah, Mark. Yeah, you wonder why Federal is in business. It's because Mark and Josh Freilich. But yeah, so put that into context. That's a few months shooting like, I shouldn't say 90,000, but it was tens of thousands of rounds of shotgun to prepare for this World Shotgun Shoot back in 2018. And it's just crazy to think that, like, you know, you can take that number and say, well, this guy he's a hunter and he has twice as much lead in his system as the next guy. And even when that number isn't dangerous, then why are we even talking about it?
Well, let me ask you this. Did he win?
He did.
Okay, totally worth it. But no, so those are some big things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about, I guess, you know, essentially what has to happen to lead for it to be dangerous in your system. You brought up ionized lead.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the right term.
No, I think it is.
I think it is.
And then also kind of circling back a little bit to how that lead becomes ionized and maybe some of the differences between like a mammal's system, like, you know, us folks, as well as, you know, other predators that we share the landscape with, and then the raptors as well, from which I understand, like, maybe even particularly Nephi in that California condor scenario, like super acidic digestive tract.
That's right.
Where
I'm
not as much. I mean, definitely some, but not as much.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be a really good biologist, although I was. My USDA classification would say that I was.
Yeah.
But but
big brain.
But yeah,
here.
there are different. You know, there are different systems, and birds tend to have a more acidic system, especially raptors. And then, if your job is to be a large raptor that eats dead things and turns them into calories,
Right,
you're going to have a pretty acidic system. And so, yeah, it's the breakdown of lead. So it's not that lead bullet that's the problem. It's when it starts to, you know, it's smaller components, it's different ionizations, and I can't talk about all of them. What I can tell you is that as a shooter, everybody should be practicing best management practices. In this day of COVID-19, please, if you weren't washing your hands before, you should be washing them now. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of things that you can pick up on your hands that are actually probably more dangerous to you as an individual than residue from your cartridges. Wash your hands.
Yeah. I mean, I know some people, they're like, oh, well, you know, I don't wash my hands when I go to the bathroom because, you know, like it's not whatever poisonous, or that's not the right word to me. And it's kind of like, okay, cool. Yeah. It's just some, you know,
Ruben,
I got in a bad crowd. I got in a bad crowd in college. No, but
it's not me.
But some people say that stuff, and then it's like, okay, even if you're not concerned about your own germs and whatever, you know, it's just like when you can't dispute, like we said earlier, lead. I mean, you can't, if it's all over your hands, and then I always wash my hands after I'm done the range, before I go to the bathroom, and then after, you know. But if it's like all over your hands, then you start eating, and then you're I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so you have the cartridge exploding right in the chamber, and like 40 to 60,000 PSI of pressure and extreme heat, some of that lead is going to get turned into smoke. It's just... Yeah,
it's interesting. There's some studies out of Italy that talk about, you know, the same thing we talk about. It's hunters and increased blood lead. And you can find the studies that, and they, again, it's not at a level that's alarming, but you saw higher blood lead, even though they didn't eat the game. So even though people hadn't eaten any, these are guys who shoot birds and then don't eat them.
Interesting.
Yeah. That, and when you started looking at the other factors, places they could get lead, it'd blow your mind. And some of them are like, if you have like some old crystal and you like to drink alcohol out of it, you're getting lead from that. If you have, the other, if you smoke, right, you're getting lead from that. If there are these other things that are confounding factors that make it very, you know, it's interesting and they make it difficult. But the other thing I would say is, when you're shooting, you shoot in a well-ventilated area. And that's why if you have an indoor range, it's important that an indoor range, if you're building one in your home, or if you own one, it's important that it have the right type of ventilation so that it pulls particulates away from the shooters downrange. And that's one of the reasons that our 5-star ranges, they all have that, because that makes sure that you don't have particulates in the atmosphere that you're breathing in, because you're much more likely, again, not through the human digestion system to get lead in. That's not where these people are getting it. They're getting it in a respiratory fashion, because that's where it's small particulates. It's much more easily absorbed and things like that. And so that is also why when you go to someplace like Federal, that makes ammunition, like everybody's getting tested all the time. And so if you want to know, is it an issue? Everybody at Federal, there are OSHA regulations. They're like all the best practices, it is not an issue at Federal. Now I do know anecdotally, I know some people who have had indoor shooting ranges who just shot just a ton of ammo indoors and never cared to do the stuff right, where they never, well, guess what? They got their blood lead tested and it was higher than recommended. And when I say that, higher than recommended, if you get 10 micrograms of lead per deciliter in your blood, they're going to consider that, it with Jeff, they're going to flag it for him. And they're going to say, you should have lower lead than that in your blood. OSHA's number is 80, right?
Well,
and so that should give you an idea about the difference. You talked about a study out of North Dakota that talked about hunters and non-hunters and blood lead. That study, the difference in the populations, I believe everybody in that study, that I know that the median was like 3. That was so if 10 is your area of being worried, 3 is like everybody's average. If you have less than 10 and you get your, no matter who it is in the population and somebody tests your blood, they're either A, not going to be able to tell, or B, they're not going to worry about it. And in order to define the differences between the hunting and the non-hunting population, the game consumers and non-game populations in that North Dakota study, they had to use a higher level of detection than you can get at a standard lab. What does that mean? That means that if you were to go to a standard lab, a bunch of us, we all walk in together and they test our blood. The difference, they're not going to be able to tell the difference because the
so
machine,
small.
The difference is so small, they can't detect the difference because it's below the level of detection. They have to increase the level of detection to be able to verifiably say, yeah, we think that these guys who ate game meat, they actually did have more blood lead. But in order to figure that out, like you had to go searching for that because it wasn't at a level that is concerning. To me, that's the take home for people as they're, if you're a hunter and you're worried if you were, you shoot something with a standard, traditional cup core bullet, that's your go-to. You feel more comfortable with that. There's some people out there that would have you believe that you're endangering your family or something. It's simply not the case. It's just not even true. Now, if it makes you feel better as a person, and this is where personal decision comes in. If that level, if that makes you feel good inside to know that that's what you're doing and you want to use an alternative bullet because of that, do that.
Yeah. I've even gone to, and like, this is total personal choice, but over the last couple of years, we've had 3 kids over the last 4 years, and we eat a lot of venison. I mean, a lot of wild game. And I've gone to kind of doing like the fall doe hunt with a rifle, and I've shot the monolithics, I've shot GMXs, and it's not for the reason that one is, quote, toxic and one is not toxic. The reason that I've done that is because the bonded or the monolithic bullets, like Nephi was saying before, they tend to maintain their mass. They don't lose as much of the bullet in that process of expanding and dumping energy in the animal. And the only reason that I've gone to that for my quote-unquote meat hunt is because there's no bullet fragments left in the meat. And I don't have to worry about my 3-year-old chewing through a piece of venison steak and coming
breaking
who's way smaller than you. And
Yeah,
has,
exactly.
Weight. And plus, you're in Wisconsin, so your furthest shot is going to be not outside the limits of what that monolithic bullet can carry like, its energy. Right?
To give you an example, though, like I have hunted in a place local to here, and I can get out to 500 or 600 yards, and out of a 308, no, I know you're an elitist from the West, and you think we couldn't have that here, but out of a 308, like. And this particular one is under a 20-inch barrel. I think it's 18-inch barrel. I'm like capped at 480 or something. Like that bullet doesn't have enough velocity to have proper expansion at about 480 yards. Compare that to another cartridge I hunt a lot with, a 6.5 PRC, with a standard cup core bullet. I'm
2,000 yards.
2,000.
I know it's a 6.5, but it's not that magical. But no, like adequate energy to have expansion well beyond 700.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say I'm the same way. I have a couple different guns, and Mark, and then I'm sorry about the delay and everything. It makes it so tough. But,
no.
So I have I've got a 300 blackout for river bottoms, and because you can hunt river bottoms in Montana. If you don't know this and you live in Montana, with a pistol, 300 blackout pistols, pretty magical. So you can get a 300 blackout pistol, and you can run 125 grain monolithic, and it's phenomenal. And you're not going to shoot very far out there. You're going to be like, it's going to work great for what you're trying to do. You need to have a bullet that holds together well if you're going after bigger game. And so when you're shooting a cartridge like that, man, it is amazing. And then I have, a 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm shooting primarily traditional bullets, Hornadies. And then I've got same thing with a 6mm. Then I've got a 7mm rem mag I use for elk. And depending on where I'm hunting, I'll run 180 grain tipped triple shock.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'll run 168 grain burger. And it just depends on where I'm going to be hunting, how I'm going to be hunting with that gun at the time, what the game is. And, I think that's, it's great to have options. We have more options now than we've ever had before. And as long as you understand your options and the limitations of each, like, you really can't go wrong. We are winners today. Like, sometimes people say we're in the good old days of wildlife populations. We are definitely in the good old days of cartridge choices for sure.
Oh man, the cartridges and technology are it's off the charts now. And I was going to say, when you and I were kind of stepping on each other there, was exactly the same thing. I mean, it's situational and game specific, and certain landscapes or scenarios may be better suited for one type versus the other. I shoot those 165 GMXs out of my 300 short mag, and they're pretty. Is that magical?
Is that a WISM? Is that what they refer to as a WISM?
Some people will call it a WISM.
WISM.
Not Texas.
Right, not Texas.
Yeah, but conversely,
right now,
I've shot a lot of bullets out of that gun. They've performed famously. I've shot Accubons out of that. I've shot Swift Scirocco's out of it. And
you mean Volkswagen?
Yeah. So, which are those are bonded bullets still, like I guess more of a traditional cup and core, but it's a bonded bullet built to drive and stay together and high weight retention,
like an interlock or something like that.
And they all do great, but I end up picking one depending on what I'm going to be likely to encounter.
Dude, sometimes I wish I had one rifle and one ammo on the shelf, because usually I spend more time deciding what to bring out with me than I actually do hunting.
Yeah.
Well, and you can go, and it's like there's not a magic bullet though. Like 6.5 Creedmoor, I think we all have one or two of them, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a cool cartridge because it's super versatile. It's gentle. You can get these high BC bullets that are designed to work really well at longer distances, but I guess in a couple anecdotal experiences of mine where you're in a scenario where you may encounter a deer at 20 yards, or you might get a shot at 600 yards or possibly even beyond. At those closer distances, I feel like you make some compromises as far as does the animal die? Yeah, but then you are getting in my opinion, a little bit more. The bullets likely to come apart more.
I want to bring up one thing that a lot of people probably don't really think about, and maybe you do when you're at the store, but the quote unquote non-tox, whether it be in a shotgun load or a pistol load or a rifle load, is typically a lot more expensive.
Yep.
And that's I think one of the things that can be really devastating to all of the talks about potential stuff that can happen, aside, one of the really devastating things is just the cost, to participate in outdoors if decisions are made based on just a knee-jerk reaction because something felt right versus actually looking at the science behind it. There's some really, really negative implications that can happen both to people's ability to afford to participate in the outdoors and in contributions to conservation through Pittman Robertson dollars because of that decreased, contribution.
Well, and then not only that, you're adding on another layer of rules and regulations, which it's another layer of complexity. Which I mean, I think we've all looked at our ours or other states' regulations books that are about they appear to be about as thick as a phone book, and
sit down and take a week.
It's another barrier. It's another barrier to overcome to be involved.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought those points up. I mean, they're important, and we know the industry. We know exactly how important they are, and so everybody understands. Even with your premium bullets, somebody might say, "Well, if I take a premium monolithic bullet and a premium traditional bullet, the costs aren't that much difference." What I will tell you is that the margin is hugely different. So the company that's putting together those bullets, they're actually subsidizing the copper bullets with their traditional bullet lines because it's significantly more expensive to do the copper. Why? Well, because traditional bullets are made out of recycled lead batteries, and if I have to use and copper bullets are made out of virgin copper, and so and so you're looking at a price difference that's significant in those two things. The other thing to know is this. When the price of oil goes up, what drives the price of oil? It's not the first barrel of oil that's pumped. It's the last barrel of oil that's pumped. This is what drives the price. The reality is, and a lot of people are like, well, why don't we all just switch? The reality is you cannot meet the demand. There is no other, copper's expensive. Yeah. And there isn't a lot of it.
Or else people wouldn't rob new houses for it.
Yeah. When what do you hear about some of the mine projects that are like, that's what they're going after is copper. So and they're starting to get into
boundary waters.
They want to mine in the boundary waters. They want the pebble mine, right? Like all these things, they're going after copper and precious metals.
Right. And I think you can't have, at least in this scenario, I feel like you can't have your cake and eat it too, because it's difficult. And I don't want anything I say to come off as I'm anti-mining, because I'm not anti-mining, right? But
You're anti-bad mining.
Anti-bad, yeah, only the bad mining.
Yeah, same here, exactly.
But then
I'm anti-bad everything.
But I think as as sports people, as people who enjoy the outdoors and participating in activities like hunting and fishing or even hiking or whatever, if you enjoy outdoor spaces, which I think in general, if you're a human being, you do. Right. Mm-hmm. You want to, practice behaviors or whatever that promote the sustainable use of these resources. And I feel like there's certain places where it's too risky to maybe have a mine. God,
well,
have I gone maybe I have gone too far. I think this is a whole nother
You should
discussion,
listen to the
actually.
Your Mountain podcast. It's available on iTunes. They talk about the pebble mine on that podcast. It's very good. It's an excellent episode.
Okay, I heard about a guy that has something to do with that.
Yeah.
I heard about it.
I think
that's Nephi's podcast. Go check it out.
Not affiliated with the National Shooting Sports Foundation, but
correct.
It's
not, but it's a heck of a podcast.
It is.
I'm trying to organize my thoughts here, not just to be careful with them, but to convey what I'm feeling. But so you want to be like, well,
here, I'll help you out. Nobody hold Mark's feet to the fire based on anything he says in the next 60 seconds.
I'm somewhat speaking off the cuff, but I feel like you might get a person that says, no more lead ammunition, all copper. And then out of the other side of their mouth, don't mine the copper.
No more copper mine.
Yeah. Guess what?
I guess that's, and so I'm like, it's you're stuck.
That's
when you
start
uncertainty. That's when you start robbing new house developments.
Your Prius has a lot of lead batteries in it.
Because that copper wasn't mined.
I will tell you that in terms of the impact of ammunition manufacturing on sportsmen's dollars and on conservation is this. Then, if you want to know, who cares about conservation, ask who's paying for it. The number one Pittman and Robertson individual payer in the United States of America is Federal Premium Ammunition.
I have
paid,
no doubt.
I think $400 million over the last, I think it was 8 years that they've paid in the PR dollars.
My gosh.
Yep. And those guys at Federal Premium Ammunition, if they would not want me to give out exactly how much, but I can tell you that the lion's share of what they produce is traditional ammunition by a long shot. We have looked at also, states where, so California is the only state that's mandated that folks cannot use for hunting any type of traditional ammunition. So it has to all be alternative ammunition. It has to all be kind of whether it's steel or bismuth or copper, it has to be something else.
And that's just for hunting, right? Not recreational shooting.
There are those who are trying to expand that. And so, and this plays into the politics of it. But yes, for right now, it's just hunting. That's not where it's stopping. And so what they've, that requirement, California is seeing exponential declines in hunters. And it's not, and in hunters in California, maybe I should say it that way, because if you're in Wisconsin, you know that those boys in California love to hunt. Mm-hmm. And but they're doing their hunting in Wisconsin. They're doing it in Montana. They're doing it in Idaho. They're doing it someplace else. In California's, their Department of Natural Resources is literally in a crisis state where I've heard their director talk about it, where they're lamenting the loss of hunters in California. The conservation organizations in California are lamenting the loss of hunters in California because of the amount of money that they spend on conservation. Mm-hmm. But
I've always wanted to hunt California. It's such a cool, physical,
it's a cool place.
Physical location, and the scenery is unbelievable.
The land is amazing.
Yeah, but it's been very difficult there, and the declines. They can't say whether the declines are the regulations now. It's buying ammunition in California is like buying a gun in California. You have to go through a background check. There's a special system. Got to use a special ID. All these things play into it, and so you're not going to be able to tell whether is it because are hunters not hunting anymore just because it's a pain in the butt to buy ammunition in general, or because it's more expensive to buy the only ammunition there that you can buy in legal use for hunting. It's tough to say whether we'll ever be able to tease it out. But both of those things certainly play into the decline of hunting and hunter opportunity in the state of California.
And as coming from my at least from my experiences, one of the biggest reasons that I got into competitive shooting was to make me a better all-around outdoorsman and a better marksman. And I can tell you that I've become a better hunter because I'm a better marksman. And yeah, like Nephi mentioned before, the cost between a box of traditional premium ammunition and a cost of, a GMX bullet or something like that, a quote non-tox, it might not be that big of a difference. It might be a $57 box of ammo for your 7 mag versus a $67 box of ammo. But the practicing, I'm not necessarily practicing with the same expensive stuff that I take out and hunt with. Now, when I'm zeroing and getting data, yeah, absolutely, I'm using what I hunt with. But spending time on the range, looking at that first question on the survey this year was do you support only using mandating the use of non-tox for anything on public land other than designated shooting ranges?
And it was nice that they put that in there.
Yeah, exactly. Is that the last time that's ever going to be addressed?
Yeah,
I doubt it.
Well, I would ask you if you don't know, and if we hadn't had the discussion before, if you weren't around people that knew what you're talking about, and you answered that question, I mean, how would you answer that question? Well, does it even occur to you that when somebody's talking about toxic ammunition, that they're implying that a $7 box of 223 that you bought at Shields, they're implying that is, did you know that they're saying that that's toxic?
Right. I think a lot of people use that ammo, and they might even get that question. Say, do you support requiring the use of non-toxic or whatever? And they would say, yes, of course I do. And they don't even realize that the ammunition that
everything that they have at home is considered toxic ammunition.
Toxic. Right. Yes, exactly. Yes. And that's where
and that's across the board. That's the case. If you've got a 22, if you have a 22 rimfire, guess what?
The whole little thing is toxic, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't even have a jacket, does it?
Might as well.
You're not
have a Mr.
You're not.
Skull and crossbones
There aren't monolithic 22 long rifles out there. In general, you're not going to find an alternative.
Yeah.
And again, that's because look at the cartridge.
I saw some at SHOT Show that a company is trying to develop for the Precision 22 game, and
God bless them.
It cost these it costs like the same as a box of premium match centerfire rifle.
Oh, wow.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
Well, Nephi, do you know like the difference between like the cost of, let's say, a pound of lead versus like a pound of copper? Do you know?
I have no idea. We could look it up online.
I
real
heard.
quick.
God, I wish I knew.
One hit pause.
It's got to be.
It's huge.
It's
It
got
is
to be. It's
I
gotta
feel
be.
like I was reading or listening to something, and it might have even been something that you guys did, but like, God, now don't quote me. Look it up. But I feel like it was almost like sub $1 and then like $4 versus $4 or $5.
Well, and the other thing too is due to the density of lead.
Maybe it wasn't even a pound. Never mind, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, and
now I'm enthralled.
like what you're about to get at, 1 pound of lead probably looks like that versus
it's-
1
it's
pound of copper looks a lot
the
bigger.
material needed to get a pound of lead versus a pound of copper.
Sure, just due to density.
Yes, it's going to be much less material, right?
Yeah.
So your copper jacketed bullet that Hornady is stamping out of a roll of copper, making the jacket through an extrusion process, and then dropping a lead ingot that looks like a pencil eraser, except about 3 times as long, into that jacket, and then crimping it, running it through a die, and sealing it up. That amount of lead to make up the weight of your bullet is much less than the amount of physical space that that same amount of copper, brass, or bronze would take up.
So this is why the quote non-tox bullets are usually a smaller or a lighter grain weight. Isn't
well,
it?
yeah, and
Also,
not to get
They
into.
probably also have to get pretty long. Too.
I'm not
Wow, now you're-
I'm not a
yeah,
bona fide
you're-
ballistician, but I can tell you that if you look at like a copper bullet, we'll call it a GMX or a TAC TX, something like that, something that you could get to shoot accurately, a G7 profile bullet, a match bullet, whatever. You would look at, like, just speaking in terms of like a 6.5 Creedmoor, because we've been doing that all episode, a 140 grain ELD match is a traditional bullet that we all shoot. It's what we buy in bulk for our range. We're all familiar with it. You guys shoot the Vortex Extreme with that bullet. Looking then at the TTSX, typically the same length bullet is probably about 120 grain.
Right.
Okay, so now what problem exists is we're going to a bullet that is a lower mass, and it's not going to carry its energy as efficiently as something that is the same size but a higher mass.
Yeah.
So whether that be the gyroscopic stability from the bullet spinning or the bullet's distribution of mass in that bullet, if we wanted to go to a bullet that was the same weight or the same overall mass, we would now have to either make the profile of that bullet more rounded towards the front, which is going to make it less stable.
Yeah.
Because now we're not getting that same ogive shape. The bullet that's lead, that's going to have its center of mass further rearward, is going to be more stable, or a cup and core bullet is going to be more stable. And the other thing that happens is Nephi mentioned SAMI. So SAMI is setting those chamber dimensions for cartridges. It's what we take a Wildcat cartridge and they test it for pressure, all of the dimensions, and then they put their stamp of approval on it. That's a SAMI approved or SAMI specified chambering. And then companies make ammo for that. Now let's take a bullet and say that SAMI specification is set so that you can run a certain range of bullets in that case, and that certain amount of powder that you could fill the case up with isn't going to blow your gun up. Now we need to take a bullet that is longer and put it in that same case. We're going to decrease our powder capacity because that bullet can't be, due to SAMI specifications, unless we're hand loading for match ammo again.
Right.
This is not
And
that.
and unless you don't care about the fact that it might not fit in a magazine.
Right, you might have to hand feed it because it's going to be too long. Well, now we have more of that bullet down in the case, taking up space in the case that could otherwise be occupied by powder propellant. Now we take a bullet that's the same mass as the other bullet, and we're shooting it with either a different type of powder so that we can maintain similar velocities or something like that. But typically what's going to happen is you're just losing case capacity.
Right.
Okay. And that bullet isn't going to perform as well in terms of accuracy. Typically, I'm not talking about like the match solid bullets that companies are CNC machining, but I'm talking about like a GMX or a TAC TX. It just, if you look at the performance of them in terms of accuracy, in terms of consistency, in terms of optimum velocity, like it's that cup and core bullet is a better bullet for shooting.
And the whole point, and with those monolithic style, they have to be going pretty fast for them to be able to expand too. So then if you're eating up powder capacity, it's kind of it gets a little bit weird.
I think you go back into better for some instances.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You know, I think
exactly.
all of us at this table use, monolithic bullets and
Got a lot of them.
and as well as traditional cup and core bullets that are lead bullets, right? Bullets that have lead, and I think you do see that kind of across the board. Like, I'll take God, I beat it to death, but it's just because I'm familiar with it. So you look at that my 300 short that you don't. There's a lot of 180 and 200 grain options, right? But at least in the Hornady line, like the GMX only goes up to 165, which the GMX is, monolithic, copper bullet, killed a bunch of deer with it. It's performed amazingly, right? But you're only, as far as I know, they only load it up to that 165 grain.
Yep.
And I think, is that
probably
because of what you're saying, Ruben?
Highly in part because of, you don't want to have, I'm an amateur hand loader at best. I hand load tens of thousands of pistol rounds, but for rifle, I don't load as many as a lot of guys like Ryan or Scott Parks or Nick Laufenberg. Those guys load a lot of rifle, but there's a point where you don't want to have more of that bullet hidden inside of the case than you want to have out front.
Yeah, especially in a short mag, you're going to start having the bullet resting up against the primer there in the back.
But that's probably a big reason,
The good news is this, and something to remember when you're talking about these different bullets. Like the exciting part is, because monolithic bullets do hold together very well and they perform better at speed, it makes a lot of sense to step down in a bullet size. And that's why you can go from a 180 to a 165, because then you're driving that bullet faster. And the other thing is, as you said, the bearing surface of the bullet, because the material is just, you need more material to fill the same space. There's the difference in density between those two, between the lead, between the traditional bullet and the monolithic. The bullet's just bigger. And so you use the smaller bullet, you can drive it faster. And what you're going to give up is, remember, what you're going to give up is ballistic coefficient. That's what you're going to give up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you'll actually you'll even notice too, not to interject, but you'll even notice when you go buy a box of monolithic bullets and a box of typical cup core bullets, that monolithic bullet is typically going to have somewhat of a ring or a series of rings around the outside of the bullet that are going to help seal in the pressure behind it so that it can actually move down the barrel, versus a traditional bullet that's going to, like Nephi mentioned before, under those extreme pressures and heat driven by the propellant, that bullet is going to conform to your bore. And that's another...
Shout out Luke at Arrowhead Rifles.
There you go, yeah.
I've said obturate so many times since his podcast.
Everything's obturation these days.
That's another...
ball bearings.
That's actually another reason, too, why... And not to go down this rabbit trail, but that's another reason why guys talk about validating your BC when you're shooting with, using a ballistic calculator, stuff like that, validating BC, because every barrel is different, so you're imparting those grooves onto the bullet, and that changes the BC. Yeah, and that's dependent upon the barrel.
And remember, when you take these things out to shoot, just know your limitations and shoot your gun and see what your gun likes, and shoot both and see which one works better for you. Because the other reality is, you got a little bit into it, Ruben, but with different cartridge designs over time, the paradigm of how cartridges are designed has changed. And so a 6.5 Creedmoor, that's a long, skinny bullet with steep shoulders, it was just designed in a different time than a 260 Remington, or than a 243, or a 300 Weatherby. And when you look at that, realize that when they designed that cartridge, Sammy also said, okay, if you're going to shoot that cartridge in a rifle, here's the twist that the rifle needs to have, and here are the chamber dimensions in order to keep everything safe. And so that's one of the other challenges as you choose these different bullets. Is why you can't just, you can't just like, well, yeah, I'm going to throw whatever into a cartridge and it'll work. In order to really make, my 7mm Rem mag is a 1/8 twist. And there's a reason I wanted that versus some of your more traditional 7 rem mags from, if you didn't get one built just the way you wanted it, it probably has a much slower twist barrel than that.
Probably at least a 10, if not slower.
Yeah, my gun will stabilize 180 grain triple shock. Why? Because I wanted a gun I wanted to be able to shoot, if I needed to shoot a monolithic for different types of game, I wanted to have a gun that would stabilize the highest BC monolithic that was available as a hunting bullet on the market. I designed the gun for that and realized that your guns are going to be that way too. There are going to be certain guns that were designed where the guy sat down and designed the gun. He designed it for a certain use, and he designed it around a certain, paradigm in terms of the bullet used. When you shoot those lighter for caliber monolithics, they typically match up better with the design of a rifle than it would if you shot, if you just said, I'm just going to swap out a 180 this for a 180 that. And that's the reason that you need to consider those things. And we're kind of lucky in that way too, because as you said, you kind of have to step down in size to make up for, to kind of make it all a wash. But it really works out great in most instances. And again, it depends on your use. If you're in Wisconsin where you can only shoot 100 yards away, Ruben, then you probably don't. You probably don't notice those differences in BC as emphatically as you would if you were, say, shooting a long-range competition like the Sniper Adventure Challenge, the greatest competition of all time, and you had to shoot out to, say, 1,000 yards with regularity. Then you'd start to care about that. What may be a very slight difference in performance at 400 yards. Well, maybe it can creep up on you. And again, it's just one of those things where we would say to people is, there's not a right and a wrong answer here. There really isn't. Mm-hmm. There is just an informed answer. It is what is your use, and pick the right bullet for your use, or depending on the rifle that you have, pick the right choice for your rifle. And if you don't have the right rifle, go buy a new rifle, and then
it's always
pick another one
advice,
for that.
Yeah.
Yes, go buy a new rifle, get a new optic. You guys got optic. I'm sure you've got a couple. I see a bunch of them on the shelf behind you there. So I'm sure you've got a few rolling around there.
Correct. We support the Second Amendment. Go buy more guns.
Hey, I mean, it's funny because like my wife gives me such a hard time. It's almost like the shoes thing. Like, how many how many shoes do you need? The more you get into ballistics, into different kind of hunting, the more you realize that there actually are limitations to the 30-06. And while it's a great card, while it may be a great cartridge,
just cut out there for a second.
For 80% of everything, there are other alternatives that may make more sense in a given situation. So why not get another one?
The 30-06 is the white New Balance tennis shoes of dads.
The Nike Monarch.
Yep.
So
high school football coach.
So like really good, right?
I don't think you got that reference.
Hey, it's really
plain.
good enough. That's all you need.
Yeah.
It's really all you need.
And the old school Browning A-Bolt and 300 Wisdom is the Saucony, whatever Mark always wears.
I'm not a regular dad. I'm a cool dad.
Yeah. That was good stuff. I do like arriving on the fact. So this clearly in many ways I think was we talk about the non-tox versus toxic or whatever and the terminology and sort of in some ways defending, if you will, the lead ammunition out there, or at least giving it the proper background information and context. But I do like the fact that it is worth reiterating the fact that there is use for both. It's not that non-tox is bad. Anything labeled non-tox is bad because it's trying to boot out lead ammunition. It's not that. It's just the fact that people should make sure that they're informed and understanding of the terminology. Because otherwise it does seem. I don't know if it's. I'm sure they're using that terminology because it's what's on the the boxes. I don't even know where the terminology ever started from, but they can seem leading.
Yeah.
Can I do a last call?
Please.
Well, I've got
do.
Can I do some? I know we're going so
last
long.
calls.
You better not steal my one from yesterday. I texted you.
Do some last calls after Ruben.
You have a Monster Energy there. Have a Monster Energy drink. It'll be good to go.
Mine aren't last calls. They might be just keep the conversations going, which I know we're like deep into this one.
There's nothing I'd rather do than talk ballistics.
What? All right.
Just say what you're going to say.
Say
It
what you
better
say-
not be what
say
I
your
texted you.
things. It better not be Ruben's thing.
I don't think.
I don't even know
I
what
don't
it is,
think.
but it better
I don't know.
not be.
I don't know what.
Steal it. He's going to steal it.
I'm not.
Steelisk.
I'm going to steal it like the copper pipes out of your house, Jim.
Ship them out to federal.
Yeah, no, I don't even know what.
Hope this helps.
So one thing I was going to say.
My donation to the cause.
So I feel like at least a couple of the takeaways here, at least in this discussion. There's a lot of research out there. I certainly haven't looked at all of it. So, but I feel like when we're talking about, in general, raptor populations, the studies show that lead toxicity or even toxins in general, they don't significantly affect the population as a whole.
You're right.
Am I right?
Yes.
And
the challenge is
not
this.
discounting
It's
that the individuals do are.
It's a fact. Now, that doesn't mean, and here's the problem, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect public perception.
Right.
Because when you have Susie from, the 7-Eleven went down and finds there may only be one bald eagle in the entire world that, gets sick because, and it might be a bajillion years old. But the issue is that affects how people feel about it.
Right.
And that's part of the thing that that's part of discussion that hunters, why we need to be willing to talk about this and understand it. We have to understand that perception is out there, and that perception probably is not coming from somebody who likes to hunt and likes to shoot. So that perception of, oh my goodness, why, what's wrong with this eagle? If somebody says, well, it must be hunters, they must be the problem with that eagle, that's bad for us. It's bad for hunters and shooters.
Right.
And so that's why we have to understand the facts, and we have to be able to address that. And you can't minimize the fact that concerns people. And if people care about that, and you may care about that, I may care about that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm hunting in an area where I think that is an issue, if I'm hunting in Condor country and I want to, absolutely, I'm going to be part of the solution.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's hard.
10,000%.
It
right?
is hard to imagine.
Again, situation specific.
It is situational, and that's the tough part, because somebody's gonna say, well, if it's a bad deal for condors, how come it's not a bad deal for? Well, because it isn't. If I'm on a side of a mountain side in in the snowy rivers in Wyoming, and elk hunting with a single cartridge that I'm praying that I'm going to get a chance to use, honestly, it's not going to matter what's on top of that cartridge. It's not going to matter whether the bullet type that I choose to employ. You're never going to be able to measure the difference that it makes.
Depleted uranium.
It's a challenging issue, and it's challenging for how people feel about it. It's important.
It is hard to imagine in 2020 how public perception of something related to illness could cause a giant chain reaction. I know, but
unbelievable, right?
It can happen.
I think it's on us
blows
though.
Something out of proportion.
Yeah,
I think it's on us, as people who recruit new hunters, right, to help educate new hunters as to what some of the battles that they might, some of the challenges and things like this that they might be encountering now as a member of the hunting public, right? And I think it's also our responsibility as hunters to know the facts. One thing I've always appreciated about talking to Nephi is there's not just feelings, there's facts. He's a very factual person who always has data to back up. And just like it's your responsibility if you want to get a good grade on a test in college or school, you need to study. As hunters, we need to study. And I think one thing we've done really good as hunters and outdoorsmen over the last, call it 10 years, as long as I've been paying attention to it, is the importance of public lands and conservation, right? And access to public lands. I think hunters and outdoorsmen are winning that battle when they're tasked with knowing about it. I'm getting better at knowing facts about public lands, why it's important. And I think just like that, we need to have facts when we're asked about, well, you have the neighbors over for venison for the first time they want to try it, and they ask if you used non-toxic ammunition. Have a good answer for that and be able to explain using data and using facts and not just feelings, so that they don't get turned off to the whole idea of hunting, because we ate venison and it might have had lead in it.
Ruben,
Was that your thing? That was a really good.
It was a
one.
really good thing.
Was that the thing?
I kind of snuck it in, but I have another one. But I'll wait for that.
Okay, just check it.
I guess I don't really.
I didn't.
See
I didn't trust it. I didn't trust that you weren't going to steal it.
Dude, I wasn't even dangerously close to.
But I texted that
why
to
would
you.
I
I
take
don't know.
that?
I don't know.
Why would I?
Time
Why
you
would I
could-
do
I
that?
I don't
Why
know.
would
Maybe
you-
because Jim
I'm
said it was
offended-
good.
I'm
It could
offended.
just slip out.
I'm offended that you would think that I would do that. So, once again, train of thought.
Oh, now you
completely
don't
gone.
have it because I was going to say.
No,
I
That's
said
all
what you
right.
were going to
It's
say.
because Ruben said it, so now
Well,
we're
talking about facts here.
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
talking about
There you
facts
go.
here, and so this is one thing that I was going to bring up. So a couple buddies of mine, close friends, like I respect them to the fullest in really every capacity of life, including them being consummate outdoorsmen, stewards of landscape, and super like educated dudes when it comes to like hunting and outdoor related issues.
Right.
And so we were having this discussion just the other day, and I was actually, and they also a couple of these guys have previous connections to state agencies, and one of their takeaways, or one of their main takeaways while working for that state agency, was essentially like, which I guess I definitely have positive feeling towards non-lead ammunition, so I don't want to think that anybody think that I don't. Hopefully, I've made that clear.
It's not. It's not either or.
But they were very
Right.
pro. Like, no, dude, that's the right call. Like, we should definitely move away from ammunition that has lead, and that was via them getting facts and I guess science and stuff that was delivered to them via their work and some studies. And so anyway, that was something that I found surprising and something that I guess I want to look into more. But it was interesting to me that we had opposing views when I consider, I'd say on 99.9% of other things, we actually agree up pretty much on everything, which is why I generally ask their opinion, because I know they're going to agree with me.
Right.
Well, I will tell you,
couldn't agree
there's
more.
some great groups out there. The Non-Lead Coalition is a great group who full of hunters who guys are say we'd never tell anybody they have to choose, and those guys are always going to make the choice to shoot a non-traditional bullet. And I respect that. The one thing that I would, you say they have access to the facts. I mean, here's what I will say, like final thing to talk about studies. I promise you, go do the studies. I sat in a room actually at the North American Wildlife and Conservation meeting the other day with a whole bunch of directors and made the ask, does anybody have a study post 1994 that shows population level negative impacts associated with the use of lead ammunition? You know what the result of that question is? It's crickets, because there isn't one. Not that there isn't somebody to try to study it. There just isn't any results that indicate it. Now, again, if you say, a study that those guys, if you do, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources did and you'll find these out there now. People are like, oh, the Google effects of lead on birds or something like that. And what you're going to pull up is pick the first study that you pull up and then go to the bibliography. And when you go to the bibliography, I want you then to pull up all those studies.
Oh my gosh,
And
this
what
is something I need to do more.
Yeah. What you will see is that they're all the same study. They're all in common. They all come from the same place. They all come from the same group of researchers. They're all from the same time frame. Now, we may be regurgitating and doing new papers now that come out and like, hey, here's a paper from 2018 that says the same thing that a paper from 2010 said. But guess what the data is based on? It's all based on the exact same 100 studies that most of them, and all of those that show population level impacts, are pre-1994. And I know that I've shared some of this with Ruben. So go look at the study. Challenge me. Show me that I'm wrong. I'm not. Because it pays to understand those things. And so, having said that, when you look at another study, again, more modern than, so after 1994, and you look at the studies that say like, hey, we've got all these different, birds that are impacted by lead that we've tested lead. And when you see those, when you have a study of 250 dead found raptors. So we're not testing live birds, find 250 dead birds, and we can find elevated lead in the bloodstreams of 4 of them. 4 of them. And one of them, we can say, we think that lead actually killed that one rather than just having elevated lead. And then the result of that study is a statement that, lead adversely impacts wildlife. That's not really fair. I think that the characterization would be accurate. It would be accurate to say, yes, we can measure and find those results. But then, what is the substance of the studies? What did they actually say? And there are a lot of great people in wildlife agencies, including the people that make surveys for wildlife agencies, who may not have read the bibliography, and who do have opinions that for them, one dead bird is too many dead birds. And I understand that. But as hunters, here's a question for you. When you go hunt birds, how many birds do you lose dead lost? Do you know as a hunter? You lose about 1/4 of them dead lost. So I want you to do the math on that. So if you start talking about, as hunters, if we're talking about what impact we have on game, if we're going to draw the line in the sand as hunters of like, oh, we're not going to kill anything. There will be no negative impacts associated with it's a real interesting gray area to start talking about. And I think it's important that each of us within ourselves answer those questions, and that we come to the conclusion that it's, whether you decide for you, if you don't want to drive to the field anymore to hunt because you're worried about whacking birds with your car, I'm going to respect that. That ought to be your decision. I'm not going to, it's not going to be the same as mine. And I think that's the challenge with this issue, is you see people who are well-meaning people that have made a decision for themselves. That's great. Just make sure that you leave other hunters and shooters the opportunity to make their own choices. If you've hunted long enough, you haven't just lost birds to wounded lost. You've lost big game animals to wounded lost too. And I would bet if you've hunted long enough that you've seen different bullets perform in a way where you've said, the way I employed this bullet, and I'm one of those people, the way I employed that bullet caused me to lose a big game animal. Okay? Don't tell me what bullet I should be choosing. Because if that bullet is the same bullet that I've had a bad experience with, that's just not the right choice for me. It might be the right choice for you and how you employ a rifle and how you shoot and where you decide to put a bullet. But that doesn't mean it's the right choice for me. And I'm very, very cognizant of the choices I make. And I always try and pick the one that I think is going to give me a one-shot, very ethical kill as fast as possible. But please don't tell me that you know more than me how to make that choice, because I'm going to put money on the table that you don't. And that's kind of my take home on that.
Boom. That's
Gauntlet thrown.
I've got nothing else. I've got nothing to say to that. I mean, that was very well said. Ruben, what was that your thing?
No, I'm good.
His thing was the thing before the thing.
Okay. Wow.
No, I think.
I will say this,
Mike,
like as a
the mic
takeaway,
has been dropped,
because I think like I can appear to be one-sided on this. I think there's opportunities where alternative ammunition can be more effective. Yeah. If I'm hunting giant Canadas in November in northern Minnesota or the Dakotas, like there's a lot of times where some of the quote non-tox options for birdshot yield better results. Yep. And I'm not afraid to say that I buy a lot of those in the fall when I'm goose hunting because they can put birds on the ground better. But let's not use emotion to tell people who can't afford those $4 a round shells that they have to buy those to participate in the outdoors. Yeah. Let's not do that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's another good point.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like a federal TSS for turkeys.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Right.
Phenomenal, right? I mean, like super crazy effective stuff. I mean, so I think everything has its place, and like you said, but to mandate it, possibly based on maybe not sound science,
or just emotion,
or based on emotion or fear or misinformation, is maybe not the best path.
I thought
to
of
take.
a good marketing thing for an ammunition company that makes non-toxic like TSS or something like that. It's actually more deadly than lead.
I'll pass that
I'm a
over.
dad. I'm a dad now. I do dad
Our
jokes.
close friend Jay-Z.
Excellent. Well, we did good. We went over an hour and a half. We haven't done that in a little bit.
We haven't, but I think it's an important, it's a
is.
super
It's
important
well worth
topic.
it.
It's the one that I've got a lot of questions about.
Yes.
You know, and Nephi, I appreciate you taking the time to
man.
answer a lot of those questions.
Nephi,
and,
you learned us real good on that.
I got one. I got one more question, but I'll take it off air. Maybe we'll do it as an extra because it'll probably lead us down like another 40-minute rabbit trail.
I think we
I'm
should-
not going to do that to everybody.
Cool.
I think because we've told people to do the research, Nephi, is there a place where people can do some of this research, or is it best to just kind of
It's
use the old Google
so
tube?
you can go to NSSF's our homepage, nssf.org, and there's going to be a bunch of talking points and things like that on there, and you'll have to once again search our page. But the challenging part is that when you go, I mean, here's the issue. This is such a it's such a political issue right now. It's become a very political issue. When you go do research on it, do your research on it. Don't go in with eyes wide open to your research. Look at who's doing the research and ask why. Those are going to be important things for you, because what you're going to see is that you can't just, I mean, we all understand the world that we live in today. Don't just assume that everybody's telling you everything right up front. Understand that there's spin on a variety of these things, and try and just be a student and make good decisions, and you will. And if you're going to buy whatever ammunition, if you're buying ammunition, make sure that it works well for you. And if you can get some that has my friend Stephen Ranella on the front of it, and that's your preferred monolithic, do that, because I like it when he makes when people support that guy. And if you're shooting matches with Hornady ELDXs, do that, or ELDMs, do that, because it's awesome ammo too. But just invest time in learning about not just the issues, but in learning about your gun and learning about the tools and everything like that. You're never going to get bored with this stuff. So just wade right in.
I think
Good
be willing to have your point of view changed or reinforced, but be willing to do what the data shows. And I mean, I was one of the first people that when I saw tungsten and bismuth and all the alternative shot shells, I was big into waterfowling for about 15 years of my life. I was hoping to be proved right, that they were all marketing, that there was no benefits to them. And I was like, wow, this stuff kills birds fast, right? Yep. And not, no marketing involved, right? There are opportunities where that will work better, and there's opportunities where you're paying for stuff you don't need. But be willing to be surprised that you might learn something in this.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I think that's my big takeaway. Go in with it eyes wide open, like you said. Be willing to have maybe your mindset changed. Like Nephi said, check your sources, and I even worry about this. Like this is a Vortex Nation podcast. We're hunters, we're shooters, we're in the firearms industry. I don't want people to think we're coming at this from like a skewed, perspective where we're trying to put spin on it, because at least I know we're not trying to put any sort of spin on it, right? So, but definitely, encourage everybody to really, look at the facts there.
Yeah. Hey, there's no silver bullet.
Oh, that's another.
There you go.
There's no silver bullet. And also, I'll throw this, as hunters, we care a heck of a lot about these wildlife populations. We want them to succeed.
Indeed.
Arguably more than anybody else.
I know your podcast is going, but hey, think about this. Here's something for you to take pride in. So a worldwide study on birds just came out. It was put out by Audubon Society. It was Birds in Crisis, talking about the crisis that birds are facing internationally and how huge that crisis is. Which, by the way, stray cats are the number one killer of birds. That it's anthropogenically related. So do your best to make sure there aren't stray cats out there. And by that I mean neuter and spay your pets. But besides
that's where you were going with that.
Besides that, I'll tell you, there are two classes
Ryan,
of birds.
Put my 22 away.
So birds are going down, globally. The numbers are going down, with the exception of two classes. Guess which two?
Raptors and waterfowl.
That's exactly right. So as hunters, if you want to know,
I've been doing some research.
The things that we're doing, if we're doing a good job, there's always opportunity for us, always to say, what can we do better? But have confidence in this. The things that we are involved in as hunters, we are the solution. We've been the solution. We are doing the right things. And so, don't, have confidence in that and take that to the bank. And again, it's population level, and that doesn't, this ultimately, this argument is, isn't it about, it's not about that, about whether we're having a detrimental effect on wildlife populations. That's not an argument, because we're not. It's about perception. Mm-hmm. And so that's a much more difficult, beast to try and work your way around, because, sometimes people want to have their minds changed and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they, and that's the challenge that you face in this one.
Yeah, that's the truth. Nephi, plug your podcast again here real quick.
Yeah.
So, not affiliated with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. If you're interested in a bunch of wonky content, go check out the Your Mountain podcast. What we do, I've been doing it for a long time. I used to work as a policy advisor for the governor of Wyoming, along with my good friend Dave Wilms, who is the director is a Western Conservation for the National Wildlife Federation. And then Mike McGrady, who recently, he's now a VP of legal at a large firm a large resource extraction group, but he was the deputy attorney general of the state of Wyoming. We've all been doing this podcast together for years now, and it's just the Your Mountain podcast deals with policy and natural resource regulations and things like that affect your land, your water, and your wildlife. You can find it at Your Mountain, itsyourmountain.com, or the Your Mountain podcast, any place you find podcasts. And we're coming up on episode number 100 now. It's unbelievable.
Nice.
It's crazy, man. It's good stuff.
Wonky content from some guys that have worked in areas of the world that most of us don't even understand at all. So that's what you want to go check out. And otherwise, Nephi, big thanks to you for coming on, and also thanks to everybody as usual for listening here on the Vortex Nation podcast. And shoot out, I don't know, questions, your thoughts on this too.
Yeah.
We want to hear your guys' thoughts. You don't have to just hear ours all the time. So Instagram, you know where to find us.
Even if you disagree. So feel free to make those comments as well. We'll delete them, but feel free to make immediately.
Them. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. They're always all points of view are very welcome. So, yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Nephi. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Stay safe out there.
Good shooting. Bye, everybody. Right. Here's my question after the podcast. And it's not meant because it's inappropriate, and I know we're all crushed for time here, but so we're talking about California, right?
Yeah.
And also kind of like a potential movement to be like, okay, it's not just lead ammunition for hunting. We're going to ban lead ammunition at the range. Yeah. And I guess and maybe this is just a different
coming,
podcast,
my friend.
But
it's coming.
So the implications of, we talk about that slippery slope with, gun control and things like that. Is that kind of the first step in this process? Is there a strategy at work here? Do I need to put my tinfoil hat on? Pull my lead hat off, put my tinfoil hat on.
If you go look at the groups that are advocating a change from lead ammunition, they're all anti-hunting groups.
Okay.
Very interesting.
You're not going to find anybody that is a pro hunting group or a wildlife group affiliated with hunting that you'd consider middle of the road that's telling everybody you should switch from lead ammunition. For example, the National Wildlife Federation, who was considering this, they have a voluntary program that they decided to work through. But what happened with them is they're like, oh yeah, we're going to tell everybody that they have to switch, and they're going to advocate for that. And this is the largest conservation organization in the world. Until they started doing the research, there's a group. This is a true story, because Dave's the guy who's working with it. One of the voices in NWF listening to it. There was a group that does wind farms. They wanted to pay NWF money. So the mitigation for wind farms would be, they wanted to pay sportsmen to use alternative ammunition, to use copper-based ammunition as justification. So the idea is hey, we kill X number of Raptors that smack into wind turbines. So we'll pay you money that then you can buy free copper ammunition to give to sportsmen.
Make it a scapegoat. make
As
lead
an- as an-
ammunition the scapegoat.
They were using it as an offset. They wanted to use it as an offset for
as an
killing raptors. Mitigation. And NWF looked at the numbers and had to laugh because the idea of how you would quantify like the difference, it's laughable. It doesn't exist.
Is there,
so-
Nephi, is there a way that everyone in the world gets like 25,000 rounds of ammo a year for that? Like, because I
Because
think
then
that's
we
probably
really
what they
all
would.
in.
Yeah, let's do it because then we all.
It's a
Well, why don't
Yeah,
why don't they just go to copper wind turbines?
That's a great idea. No, I think, but the challenge, like you'll see the groups that are in favor of, and you'll see
Simple.
like, and you know your buddies at the state agencies you said who are like all about this. Like the question, like that's not wrong. And I have friends, I'm sure that, let's talk about Meat Eater, right?
Mhm.
There's some guys over at Meat Eater, probably Giannis and Ryan, who just think, and maybe not Ryan, but because he's more traditional, but people who are like all into on copper, right? Because they have heard from the guys at from Landon and Chris Parrish at the non-lead. They've heard like, well, stories of dead raptors, right?
Mm.
And they're like, I don't want to be associated with any killing of raptors. And so for them, they feel better. They've decided that they make the world a better place by shooting non-tox, copper, whatever it is. And so that's a decision that they've made that intrinsically it makes them feel better inside. Fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Cool.
You will never, but here's what I know statistically, here's what I know as a fact. If we all switched, you won't be able to measure the difference in raptors in numbers. You will not be able to measure the difference.
Yeah, when you
Plus
said
the
like
the cost of that ammo will even go up even more.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah,
because
there's
what it does is there's
it takes the
supply and
supply
demand.
away.
Supply and demand.
It's-
Well, and
it's not-
you're talking about recycling earlier too, right? Like,
Yeah.
this lead ammo is being recycled from batteries and maybe some
It's
other
old car
sources. I don't know, but predominantly old car batteries,
Yeah.
right?
It's old. It
So-
is old car batteries. It comes in a truckload a day into Federal Premium as literally a semi-load of lead ingots
It's got to be the
from
heaviest
recycled batteries.
freaking truck on the planet.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk to somebody about it, you should go talk to
it's
John
the
Zimmel
densest.
and visit with them sometime. It's fascinating to just kind of see their process.
I know the DOT stuff.
Now, what I
it's
will
not
tell
the
you,
heaviest.
here's the challenging part for us to kind of wrap our minds around is like there are people that this issue is not going away.
Right.
And even with good facts, this issue is not going away
Well,
because the people that are pushing the issue, they don't care.
They know
about
the
the facts.
facts.
Right.
They know
Some
the
of them
facts are
do,
against
some
them.
of them don't.
And they still don't.
It's irrelevant. It's
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Yeah, it's
so-
just, it's yeah, and you hope that they don't sway, people's opinions who are, fellow sportsmen and stuff like that. And the thing is like you were saying before, if there's people out there who feel they make a better place by using non-tox, whatever, and they use that, great. I think that's the problem though, is that sometimes I don't know if people, whatever, do they feel insecure about their choice? Do they feel as though like they are being some just kind of big time like warriors for their cause or something? But when they all of a sudden start saying, well, just because I feel this way, everybody else in the world has to do it because I feel this way. It's like, well,
I
that's
think
not
one
the
thing
case
that
at
was
all.
really hard for me to read that survey, and like I know people at the DNR, I know good people at the DNR.
Oh, dude, absolutely.
And like I read that survey and I'm like, they're literally trying to make me feel bad for answering no, I don't think it should be
Yes.
mandatory.
And
And,
it's
like,
like-
even in the thing where it's like Wisconsin's 9-day deer season, do you want this? I'm like, do I want 9 days or whatever it was, 10 days added onto the deer season?
I think it was like, essentially from
Okay.
our traditional
Do you want to
9
make
to
the deer
19.
season, basically, like, do you want to make
I'm
it
like,
longer?
yeah, I'm like, yes, okay, because you're telling me about all the problems with CWD, so let's get rid of some more deer. So I'm like, let's take some more deer, okay, but then it's like, oh, because you said this, how do you feel about getting rid of this other season? It's like, why does it have to be an either or? Like, no, yeah, leave that season until you stop bugging me about how many deer we need to kill.
Yeah. The funny part about this is I'll tell you, like sitting in that room with all the directors as they talk about this issue, all the directors know that there's not that this is not an issue. You have a lot of mid-level people at these wildlife agencies who have decided it's an issue for them.
Right.
So then you get this mission creep where they push out materials, and depending on how the materials are worded, and you're going to get a study out of Wisconsin that's going to say like, oh, Wisconsin deer hunters don't want us to use non-toxic. And, I think one of the funny things, if you didn't notice this in the data I gave you, look at how much of it's based from, look at how much the Peregrine Foundation is associated with,
Right.
which is also that fund the Non-Lead Coalition. And when you start to realize how much of that connectivity there is, and you look at, and they reference the DNR study out of Minnesota, that's when they say the impact on wildlife, the Peregrine Foundation's website steers you towards that Minnesota study that then is like that, all those different studies are in the background of it. That's where I went and did my research, is those individual studies. But those Peregrine guys, like you hear about the whole deer in, they're a self-licking lollipop. You hear like, I
like that.
the North Dakota study where they're like, North Dakota determined, there's all these fragments in of deer meat. And so therefore they recall, Peregrine Foundation did the entire damn thing. What they did is they brought a bunch of people to Sheridan, Wyoming, to a ranch there, and they nuked like 100 does, right? And then, so they did the shooting, and then they took them to processors and said, process everything you can, right? And then they shipped the meat out, and then they x-rayed the stuff, and then they took it to North Dakota and said, oh my God, look at all these little pieces of lead in this meat, and got North Dakota to freak out. So after North Dakota freaked out, then Peregrine Foundation points and goes, hey, did you see what North Dakota did? This is obviously a problem because they freaked out about it. When in reality, it was the Peregrine Foundation that caused people to freak out about it. And then North Dakota goes and does a study related, about it's just.
We should ask Mike McDowell about that.
Dude,
But then, like,
I have to pee really bad.
But then I do have to ask the question.
If I don't make it back before you're off, Nephi, thank you. All right, sorry.
I do have to ask the question then, though, Jim. Don't. Godspeed, Jim.
Don't pee right there.
He didn't make it.
But so they did shoot these deer, and they processed these deer. So there did end up being significant lead in the deer. So I don't think you can deny that was the case.
Yeah. No, but remember, what best management practices do you use? And so here's what I would say.
Oh, yeah. We didn't talk about trimming or anything.
Yes. And I would say this right now to our friend Steve Ranella. Steve's probably doing exactly the right thing for Steve Ranella. Steve is hawking monolithic bullets, and it's got his name on the box. Good for him. What is Steve going to do if he shoots a deer? And now Steve uses all kinds of bullets. Has before, used everything. There's a pretty good chance that those cats over at Meat Eater are going to try and take every piece of that animal home, like every freaking piece of it.
Yeah.
If that's you, and you're not willing to say like, hey, here's the wound channel, I'm going to cut around it liberally, and I'm scared of lead. If you can't do that, then use a monolithic bullet.
Yeah,
because that's going to make you feel better. Now, is it going to keep your kids from getting sick? It's irrelevant. They're not going to get sick either way. The numbers say that there's not going to be a difference.
So Nephi, I can't remember where this was. And I'm a terrible person for even bringing up for not having a source. But in Texas, there was a study done. I'd have to again, forgive me, but in Texas there was a study done on certain. It might have been on like coyotes, but it was on some form of animal that feeds off of like dead pigs and stuff. And they actually found that more deadly than lead was the small razor sharp fragments off of monolithic bullets. They're cutting up insides of stomachs and tracheas more than.
I mean, like it's. I don't even know if we want to go there, but like there is no perfect solution.
No, there's
and
not.
Copper toxicity is ugly too.
In that study that you were just talking about,
did
they note at all what bullet was used and its designed, I guess, construction as well as shot
is it
placement?
a VMAX?
Are you shooting a ballistic tip?
It was like a Remington core log. It was just a cheap cup core bullet.
And
which is the other? And
were they shoulder shooting everything?
They were just shooting them. So they were trying to shoot them wherever they could. It was like just killing them, like whatever shot. These guys are not marksmen. They're also not ballistic experts.
I want to know too, like, and the other thing too is like an organization that's willing to go in and just gut shoot and shoot a bunch of animals just to kill them is like, well, okay, so how many animals died because of that? 100. How many animals died because of lead?
They gave it all the food banks,
4.
right? They
sure.
gave it all the food banks.
Yeah,
so
but you know what I'm saying, right? It's like, does the ends do the means justify the ends? Okay, we want to prove that 4 deer died from lead poisoning, so we killed 100.
And, yeah, so the deer aren't going to die, right? The issue is whether or not they want to say whether you're eating
whether you
lead.
Or raptors or
you are.
Okay, yeah, I get it.
But definitively, with certainty, like you can't find you can't find it anywhere because it doesn't exist. Like we're like, oh yeah, people ate lead from an animal and therefore got sick.
I believe that.
There was one instance, a kid, where there's one recorded instance. He got a lead pellet, not a piece of lead bullet, a lead pellet got in his appendix and he got appendicitis. That's it. That's it. And that's why you're like, like you could be goofy about it. And I don't want to be on the other side, like radical on the other side. Right. There's good and there's bad. And then the last thing is like, if everybody switches, everybody's got to buy new guns. Because the other thing that people aren't talking about is like, there's a reason. Like the gun designs are just wrong. If you're going to make the best use of monolithic bullets, the guns are all designed wrong. Yep. And so, yeah, we could all switch, but everybody better buy new guns to get the guns to actually perform the way that they should and to perform the best that they possibly can. Right now, you're sticking a square peg in a round hole. Steve is doing the right thing for him because he's shooting a 6.5 300 Weatherby, shooting a 120 grain bullet a bajillion miles an hour, and he doesn't dial his damn optic, does he?
No,
Vortex.
It's the perfect setup.
No. And so he wants to shoot point blank out to 300 yards, something the size of a basketball. He doesn't care. And Ruben, you know this. Steve's technique is, and so it doesn't matter that his technique isn't great and all these other things that come into play and like the gun's not a minute of angle gun, none of that matters because none of those cats are trying to shoot that far. If they were,
well, when Ben and Cal did the Vortex Extreme last year, I talked to him about coming out and taking a long range class from my team here at Vortex, and they were all about it. But like at the end of the day, you have the most popular platform in the world for hunting content. Like it's
a great opportunity.
Doing amazing things.
You need to learn.
Yeah,
they're great dudes.
They are.
But just understand where their biases come from. That's what I said. It's not like Steve, like, and again, he's the perfect dude to be selling that setup. But if a girl in his office, if Corinne in his office is going to get into big game hunting, she should be shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor and a 140 grain bullet. And the only way that's going to work great for her is if she's shooting a traditional bullet.
Yep.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.